Okay, hi again. We're going to talk about Chapter 5 now. As we review the two prior arguments, cosmological argument sought to prove that God exists because there had to be a beginning. There had to be a cause to cause everything else to happen. It didn't just suddenly, the world, the universe didn't suddenly just happen. Even those who argue the Big Bang theory have to argue that there was a cause to the Big Bang. Now, some will argue, well, that was because of physics or because of chemistry, but what caused then the chemicals or the physical properties to cause such a thing to occur? So again, the idea behind the cosmological argument is that there had to be a beginning, and thus the beginning was God. Now, one could argue that it wasn't God or Allah, that it was some intelligent being, but for the most part, the cosmological argument proponents argue that it was God. Then we looked at the teleological argument, which basically said that there is order in the universe, that as we look in our world, that there are processes, that there is regularity in our world that could not have happened by accident, that in fact these things are here by design. The process of gravity, the process of the sun coming up every day, the process of the moon waning and waxing, the processes of leaves falling every fall, the process of oak trees holding on to their leaves throughout the entire winter, whereas a ginkgo tree, for example, loses all of its leaves, sometimes in a matter of overnight. So the people who hold to the teleological argument argue that there must be a God because there are regularities and there are processes and laws excuse me, that define an intelligent being, somebody who created this. This is where creation science has come into play, and something you hear in the news quite regularly. I think in northern Kentucky, I haven't been to it, but there's actually a creation science museum. I've heard of church groups going up there to review it. I've never been, but they say it's very good. And it's basically the teleological argument that one cannot look at the world as is and say, gosh, there was not a created being who created all of this. And as I said in my earlier video, if you just simply look at nature, now in theological terms, the idea is that God created all that is. It's a natural revelation that there surely must be a God because things can't just happen this way. If you've ever stood on a warm summer night in a field and looked at a sunset, it's the majesty of that is unbelievable. Or stood on a beach and watched the sunrise or sunset. In your all's case, probably the sunset. It's just a beautiful thing to behold. But now we're going to look at a third argument called the ontological argument. Ontology means the state of being, B-E-I-N-G, or to be. And this argument is going to be very short for my lecture part because I'm going to point you to some resources because it's kind of a strange one in one way. Anselm, who was this guy in the 11th century, basically says, if I can believe it, then it is. So he was talking about not trying to prove the existence of God, but he was trying to understand how he understood God. And he said God could not be placed within the realm or scope of that which he could understand. And for those people who follow Allah, the Muslims who follow Allah, the Hebrews, and the Christians who follow God, Yahweh God, I think most would argue the same point. We can't define God in terms that we understand. It's not possible because God is something that we are not. And to put the boundaries of physics or even comprehension in trying to understand who this God is beyond our capability. Now, we can certainly know things about the nature of God, but to be able to understand how God, for example, is to many people omnipotent. He's all powerful, he's all knowing, he's all good, he's all places at all times. We talked a little bit about that early on in this course. So the ontological argument says if you can believe that there is a God, then there is a God. Well, of course, the counter argument that many have come across is saying, oh, okay, if I believe that the sky is purple, then the sky is purple. Or if cars run on, instead of gasoline, they run on water, then they run on water. That's the counter argument. Except many philosophers would agree with that, except when it comes to God. They said because the idea that God can, that in our beings that we can think of something superior to us, that our created beings are something superior, that something superior created us, must therefore be. And that's what the ontological argument argues for. That the mere fact that we can think of God as being, as existing, proves the existence of God. Now you say, well, that's a pretty weird argument, but if you think about it, and if you think about where this is coming from, sure, the sky is not purple. Sure, cars don't run on water, although that would be nice. But the fact that we're not talking about water and we're not talking about the sky, we're talking about the existence of a superior being who has placed within us what Pascal called a void in ourselves that can only be filled by a deity, by God, then in a way it does make sense. How can we think of a God if no God exists? Why would we think of a God if no God exists? So that's the ontological argument. I know this was a very short touch point, but this is chapter 5 in your book. And for your paper, what I'm going to ask you to do is compare and contrast the cosmological, teleological, and ontological arguments. Now remember what compare and contrast means. Give me similarities and give me differences. They don't have to be bullet point, but show me that you understand what the three arguments are saying. How are they similar and how are they different? Okay, I'm going to point you to several resources. Now, a lot of people say that Wikipedia is not a resource, but the more I study Wikipedia and the more I learn about them, it's actually an excellent resource. Wikipedia has a slogan, something like, no new idea. In other words, everything that is put on Wikipedia is supposed to be vetted. That is, that scholars in those particular disciplines are to look and review and make sure that the material is correct. There are plenty of things that are not vetted on YouTube or on Wikipedia, and that I can guarantee you that. But I'm going to point you to a couple of articles on Wikipedia about those three types of arguments, which I think in very concise, succinct terms really explains what Davies has been talking about in chapters 3, 4, and 5, and I think will help you get a better grasp of what it means, what these three arguments mean, and why they're important in our study. Okay? Thanks a lot, guys.